What's up, guys? Hi, and welcome to Uncle Scott's Kitchen. Today we're going to take a look at this guy. This is an Emile Henry, not Henry, but Henry Bread Pot. If you've never used one of these before or seen one of these before, they're pretty neat. What we're going to do in today's video is run through its stats and features, and then we're going to bake some bread. We're going to bake some sourdough bread, and then we're going to make some regular bread. See if this thing produces a nice loaf, so to speak. Now, this thing comes in two pieces. It's got a bottom part, and then the top, which is the lid, has a lip around the edge, and this fits securely over the bottom part of the bowl. And what you do in a nutshell is preheat this thing in your oven. You take the top off, carefully with oven mitts of course, put in your bread dough, put the lid back on, and bake your bread inside. This thing is good for producing artisan loaves, and essentially it produces, for lack of a better term, a Dutch oven effect. The lid, it traps in the heat, it traps in any kind of moisture and steam, and that's supposed to give your bread, your dough, a nice oven spring. It's supposed to lift up, and also that steam that's trapped inside helps the bread develop a nice crust. We'll see about that. Now, these things are also marketed as potato pots. You'll see the same model sometimes online marketed as a bread and potato pot. People bake potatoes in these things, they roast other root veggies. So we're going to kind of do that as well, see if it has some good secondary uses beyond baking bread. And try to determine if this deserves a place in your baking lineup. Let's get started. The first thing I wanted to do is give a shout out to Emile Henry as a company. I ran across these bread pots a couple of months ago when I was online doing some research on some bakeware. I wanted to upgrade some old Pyrex we have around here. Now, my wife called me a wuss, and I don't know why, just because I spent 7 hours on the internet looking up info on bakeware. What? But I ran across these, but I was previously looking at some Staub and some Le Creuset bakeware, some of their ceramic bakeware. Now, those are really high-end French brands. We all know them from their enameled cast iron. But when I was looking at the bakeware, I noticed down at the bottom of the page it would say, for both of those brands, made in China. Made in China. Now, I have no problem with a guy in China getting up and doing a hard day's work and making some bakeware at the old factory. What I do have a problem with is when a French brand has products made in China. If I'm shopping for something from France, from a French brand, I want it to be made in France, which is kind of crazy, but you actually have to say that these days. These Emile Henrys, made in France. So I give them credit right off the bat for doing that. These are, it says made in Burgundy, the Burgundy clay. And while we're talking about clay and ceramics, I should point out that this is a ceramic dish. Unlike, say, a cast iron Dutch oven, which this is kind of a competitor to and a substitute for, these are made from ceramic. If I were to drop this on this countertop here, drop it on the floor accidentally, it would probably shatter, crack, and break. So you got to be careful with these things. So when you look inside, you see a few ridges in the bottom. Also have a few ridges in the top. And they're not a huge size. They make a small round loaf. I note that Emile Henry makes these the same material in a variety of shapes and sizes. You can get a bread cloche if you want to make longer loaves, different size loaves. They make baguette bakers, same material. This one is good for making kind of the smaller round loaves. And that's good if you happen to use these type dough proofing baskets. They match up well in size. So you get your dough rising and proofing in these, and you can kind of just dump it right in, and it kind of fits pretty well. So I do like that. It weighs in right at about 5 pounds, so not too heavy. I think most people would be able to move one of those around. This one is a nice bright red. I think they call this a flame red color. And what I like about that is everything seems to be kind of monotone and different shades of off gray these days, if you will. And if you put something nice and bright and shiny red on the stovetop, just color-wise, it really does kind of seem to pop a little bit. So I do like that. So let's jump in and bake some bread. The first one I'm going to make is a no-knead white bread on a card that came with the bread pot. And this is a simple bread, a no-knead bread. The night before I wanted to bake it, I measured out some flour, some yeast, some water, some salt, got that combined and let it rise. Now the next day I turned out my dough, folded it a few times on a floured surface. I put it under a floured towel, let it rise a little bit more, and then I started the oven preheating. Now for the bread pot, you're supposed to bake your bread in a preheated pot. So I put this in the oven and allowed it to preheat. When it was up to temperature, I pulled it out and I panicked because it looked like I had scorched it. The thing had changed color, it had turned dark, and I thought, well, maybe I had preheated the oven too high for too long. I don't know. I thought maybe I had scorched the pot. And so what I did was get on the internet and dig around for a while. And what I found out, and don't panic if this happens to you, is that these things, when they get hot, they will kind of change color. They will change to a darker color. Later, when they cool back down, they go back to the original bright red color. So no reason to panic there. So I carefully removed the hot bread pot from the oven, removed the lid, and here I turned my dough into the pot. Now I didn't grease the pot, I didn't flour it, I didn't use parchment paper, I just put the dough right in. Is that going to cause problems? Is it going to stick? I was a little bit worried at first. And I got to say here, I was also a little bit worried because that dough kind of collapsed and it looks a little bit ratty going in, doesn't it? Scored the top, got the top back on the bread pot, put it in a 450-degree oven for about 40 minutes, pulled it out, take the top off, and holy cow, I'm pretty impressed here. That dough, it started kind of flat and ratty looking. And look at this, we got a nice oven spring. The dough popped up in there and it's beginning to develop a nice crust. Now the directions say to remove the lid, put the pot back in the oven and let it go another 10 to 15 minutes or so. I let mine go about 12 minutes till it looked like it was done about the way I like it. Took it out and look at this. It didn't stick. It's got a nice crust on there. And I gotta say, I think mine looked pretty doggone similar to the image that came with the card with the bread pot. So kind of proud of myself there. And what I want to say here too is right out of the box, I like a product that does what it promises to do. So they sent a card with a nice recipe. The thing worked well. It produced exactly what was printed on the card. So I do like that right out of the box. Okay, as this thing is also marketed as a potato pot, before we get into sourdough, let's cook some potatoes. Now normally around here, if we're gonna do nice oven baked potatoes, I'll take some russets, scrub them down, get some oil, get some salt on the outside, and wrap those in foil and bake those for a while in the oven. You can also use this bread pot to bake potatoes. If you're gonna use the big GMO kind of mutant russets, it'll probably hold 4 or 5 or so. I had some smaller russets, a bag of these, so I washed these, and I got about 10 of these in the pot. Put in a garlic, put in some herbs, kind of like I saw in one of the manufacturer's videos. Got those in the oven. And about an hour and 20 minutes later, more or less, pulled those out. And they turned out pretty darn good. But what I'm gonna say here when it comes to baked potatoes, I think it's kind of a push comparing these to ones made in the microwave. I'm not a big fan of microwave baked potatoes. I thought these were definitely better compared to the ones that are baked in foil with a little bit of oil and salt. I like the texture on those a little bit better. These were still very good. With the oven baked in foil, there's a little bit more waste. You're throwing away foil, a little bit more mess. But the texture I thought was a little bit better. So kind of a push when it comes to baked potatoes. You can also use this pot for roasting veggies. And here is where I didn't enjoy the pot quite as much. I've got some root veggies here, some potatoes, some onions. Due to the supply chain, I was having trouble finding orange carrots, believe it or not, at my local grocery store. So I've got some colored rainbow carrots, if you will. And I got all these peeled up, chopped up, got them in the pot. That went in the oven for about almost an hour and a half. And when I got these out, they were done, but they were kind of mushy. And I didn't really enjoy the texture of these veggies. Now they were cooked okay, they tasted okay, but if I were going to cook veggies in the oven to kind of roast veggies, I much prefer using a roasting pan and allowing that hot air to circulate in the oven and kind of develop a more brown texture on the outside for a roasted veggie. Now these almost took on more of a steamed veggie effect, and I just don't think I like that as much as roasted veggies. So for these secondary uses, baking potatoes, roasting veggies, the pot's okay, but I kind of prefer other methods a little bit better. Let's jump back to the primary usage for this bread pot and bake some sourdough bread. Now, when it comes to bread, I enjoy regular bread, but I really do enjoy sourdough bread, maybe a little bit more. There's a little bit more work involved, maybe an extra day of rising and proofing time, but I think it is really worth it, especially if my wife does all the work. So a little bit more kneading, a little bit more rising time, a few more steps when you make sourdough, but still kind of the same basic process. We just use the sourdough starter instead of the yeast, got our flour in there, some kneading, let it rise, got it in the proofing basket, let it proof for a while in the fridge overnight. Got the Emile Henry Bread Pot preheated, got that out of the oven, open it up. Now here my wife is a little bit worried that the dough is going to stick for some reason, so she used a piece of parchment paper in the bottom of the bread pot. You don't have to do that, and it turned out it was not necessary. Got that dough in there. Now when we bake other breads in the oven, oftentimes my wife will put a pan of water in the oven along with the bread, get a little steam in there, it helps the crust. Here, because this is going to be sealed in, get that kind of Dutch oven effect, we kind of sprayed down the top of the loaf. Went through the same process, 40 minutes or so covered, and look at this, it's spraying up nicely, and it turned out to be a nice sourdough loaf. Now to my untrained eye, I couldn't really tell any difference in the crust between the regular bread that was not sprayed with a mist of water and the sourdough bread that we did spray with a mist of water. They seem pretty similar to me there, and there was no sticking either way, either without any kind of parchment paper or with some parchment paper in the bottom. So I think it works just fine either way. And this sourdough loaf turned out very nicely. Nice crumb, nice crust, and we tore through that thing. Now around here we bake all of our own bread. A couple years ago I did what I call a 1-year bread challenge. I made all my own bread for an entire year. My wife is kind of into it too. We've got grain mills, we've got loaf pans, we've got baguette trays, baking steels, on and on. What we often use though is an enameled cast iron Dutch oven. And if I were to pick a competitor for this bread pot, it would be an enameled cast iron Dutch oven. If you've got an enameled cast iron Dutch oven and you're making artisan bread in your home oven and you're happy with those results, probably no reason to switch. You're not going to see a dramatic difference between loaves made in those and this dedicated bread pot. On the other hand, however, this thing, it works well. Right out of the box, we produce bread that looks exactly like the bread included in the professional picture. So it worked well the first time, and I've been using it, and it produces delicious homemade bread. We've made the sourdough, we made the regular bread. The breads have a very, very nice crust. You get kind of that crunch and chew on the outside. Then in the middle, you get that crumb where it's kind of moist and soft. And we absolutely tear through the bread that we make in this thing. So I really do like it. Now, whether you should get one or not, that's really up to you. If you're happy with what you have with the Dutch oven, I'd say probably not. If you're getting into baking and you like kitchen gear and you like specialized stuff, then probably so. The Emile Henry ceramic French made bread pot. I really like it. It makes delicious bread and I give it a thumbs up. And if you'd like to get one of these for yourself, make sure you check out the shopping links below. Look somewhere on this screen for links to other fun videos that you might enjoy. Thank you for watching. We'll see you again next time on Uncle Scott's Kitchen.